going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to get into running Underrot as a tank. For this first pull, you can see it's a rather big pull. I'm avoiding ticks. It is Fortified Week, and we're going to go ahead and lust this pull. This dungeon's great because you really just kind of play it based around lust timing. Get into a little bit more of that as we go. Biggest thing here is just making sure that maggot is contained so that it doesn't continuously go off, and soothing the matron buffs that go out. We're going to another matron here. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to keep our targets interrupted, disoriented, do whatever we need to do. And then you'll notice that I am removing the matron's buff as well with Soothe. In this next pull here, I'm going to go ahead and blow my first Incarn. Again, just keep in mind that it is fortified, so I'm playing more around that than I am Tyrannical right now, which is also why we lusted that first pull and why I'm avoiding ticks. Similar to the first two pulls, the only difference here is that the spirit is rooted. So on weeks like Sanguine, you're really going to want to make sure that you're killing the other mobile targets outside of the hitbox of the spirit. Otherwise, you're going to fully heal that spirit. Other than that, you really want to focus it down and just make sure you're interrupting as you can. For this first boss, it's relatively easy. You want to interrupt as many blood bullets as possible as a team, and then when the boss splits, you're going to want to avoid the double frontal. That little teleport that she does away, you don't want to stand within that red pool, and then that green little pool that she shoots forward is her frontal ability. Now, one thing to note about that is it is a little bit buggy right now. Both her and her clone will cast it, but it does have the ability to hit just not directly in front of her. So if you're a little too close or you're off to the side, you can still get clipped by it right now. I don't know if it's a bug or if it's just something that Blizzard hasn't fixed yet, or maybe it's completely intentional. I'm not sure, but I've seen a lot of people die melee, as well as myself early on, thinking that I was completely outside of that green puddle, and I ended up getting clipped by it and dying. It's definitely a one-shot at Tyrannical. So from a comp perspective, this is a complete pug. We plugged into this key. It's a 21, and I'm trying to stick to a pug-friendly route as much as possible. So ideally what we'd want to do is thread the needle here and just make sure that we're not pulling these ticks. As you can see, somehow I managed to body pull here, so we're just going to deal with these. I'm not going to chain these into the next pull just because the ticks are a little bit more dangerous than I would like. We're off to a really sloppy start here, but the good news about Underrot, and the reason why I wanted to show this clip, is because the timer is friendly enough that this key is very recoverable. So try not to get discouraged if you do have some butt pulls. And then as we enter this next area here, this is really the area that I think most groups struggle on the most, because each mob has a different mechanic. So these lashers, you're going to want to make sure you're interrupting. The maggots, you're going to want to make sure that you're stunning or disorienting to make sure that their frontal doesn't go off, because it's hard to tell for some people which side is the butt and which side is the front. And then lastly, these blood swarmers have a fixate mechanic that on fortified, if you get one or two tapped by it, it can absolutely kill you. These little green swirls as well, if you stand in them for more than a second or two, you can absolutely go down just in one tick, especially if they end up stacking. So that's the other thing you want to be careful of, and those come from the rots. Now the way that I'm pulling this, especially in a pug, is I'm making sure that I am not getting more than one blood swarmer at a time. Pug groups just are not able to handle the double fixate mechanic that goes out, especially if it goes out at the same time. And as you can see, we're still struggling and having our fair share of death. It's just mainly because things aren't getting interrupted, things aren't getting crowd controlled, they're not getting stunned. We're not always helping the fixated target in the way that we should be. So we've now gone through two blood swarmer pulls, waiting on our healer to get back, and then we jump into this next pull, which of course starts off with another blood swarmer. If you want to be careful on this pull, because if you go too far, you can absolutely get double blood swarmer. You can see there's two sitting right there. I go ahead and I grab this maggot as it patrols over, and I leave the other two blood swarmers there. We went ahead and we finally got a stun off on that maggot to stop the frontal. Went ahead and Typhoon there to do the same thing. And then overall, just making sure the group is safe. And I'm going to grab one of these blood swarmers and I'm going to bring them forward. I'm leaving the rest of the trash because I have my eye on the lust timer. We still have 2 minutes until our next lust, so I just continue to pull trash until we get the lust up for the next boss. Now we do have an unfortunate death here, which is ultimately what slows us down. Otherwise we would have gone and cleared the trash all the way up through the next boss, and then doubled back to kill Cragmaw. That's just not the case. So we had our Demon Hunter go down, so I decided to stop pulling and just kind of wait. So again, this route is very flexible based on what's happening in the dungeon, so you can always adjust based on that. So given the fact that our Lust timer is almost ready, and knowing that I have at least one more trash pull before the next boss, I'm going to go ahead and double back now, just to optimize the most of our time. Grab this last little trash, pull it onto the worm, and again, the worm is a rooted bomb, so on those sanguine weeks, you're just going to want to make sure that you're killing everything just outside of the worm's hitbox so you don't end up healing it to full. Other than that, this is a pretty easy pack. It really consists of interrupting prio targets, stunning as you need to stun, and just making sure that things are dying in a relatively quick manner so that your tank doesn't get shellacked. So here we go, we're going to double back, Lust is off cooldown, and we get the last bit of our trash, which of course includes 1 Blood Swarmer, and 2 Rots and 1 Maggot. This run is definitely getting away from us in terms of sloppiness, but if you look at the timer, we are more than good. And this is really what Pug Life is all about. So a lot of us have seen this before, we've all dealt with it. We do the best that we can. Our Demon Hunter will get back and we'll pull the boss. Alright, we're about to get into Cragmaw here. A couple of things that are worth noting from a tank perspective that I'll go over. So first off, I like to pull the boss right here. It gives me a lot of room to move around. It allows the rest of your group to bait the charges right into the ribcage there. Step on these maggots, make sure that they don't spawn. And then there's a boss frontal that you can actually range. It's called Indigestion. And if you have any kind of deadly boss mods or big wigs or little wigs or anything like that, you'll be able to track when that's going off. About 1 second before you cast it, I start running out. That gives me more than enough time to just run away without any assistance and completely avoid it. Now when he does his rampage, I go ahead and I roar, and I make sure that everyone has better movement. That way I can go ahead and keep the boss and bring it right back where it needs to be, and we can start to bait again. I continue to avoid the frontal the best I can, and we're making sure these maggots are not spawning. So we went ahead and did his tantrum again. We're going to go ahead and step on these. We only have 1 tick here, not too bad. And really at this point in time, after that second rampage, you're just going to want to focus the boss. If it is tyrannical, it might take you a little bit longer. Hopefully you don't get a third one of those, but you'll end up using a little bit more of the room if that's the case. So we're off to the races. We've got a majority of this trash cleared, which certainly helps. Half of the timer is gone, and we've only got 2 bosses left. For these defilers, it's nice if you're able to set a kick order. We like to mark at least one of them and call out who has the marked one. I usually will take the unmarked one and then hope that either the healer or potentially another caster takes the second one. They do a Shadow Bolt Volley, and then they do another cast that really needs to get interrupted, and because that's the chain cast right there, and that's the one that hurts the entire group, puts a curse on you, which we have right now, which I need to wait to run off because it makes you take increased damage, and that's not what we want. So we go ahead and pull this boss. I bring it over to the side immediately. Some tanks like to just kind of aim it from the outside in, but given that I'm a bear, it allows me to do a couple things. I can continuously step on these mushrooms and heal myself without the assistance of the healer. I take advantage of that and do that when I can, but for the most part, as a tank, you want to make sure that you're aiming these shockwaves on these mushrooms and clearing them as much as possible. If you are a DPS in the group, you're going to want to make sure that you are not clearing the mushrooms where the tank is, mainly because the tank is likely getting a shockwave ready to aim, and if you go ahead and take those mushrooms, then that shockwave is all for naught. So you want to make sure that you're aiming the shockwave and you're making it very obvious where you're going to go so that the DPS in your group know that they can clear mushrooms elsewhere. So make it very obvious. Anything that's left, especially in high tyrannical keys, you're going to want to make sure there's 0 when this mechanic goes off. Otherwise, you're going to get people dying instantly in the group. That's pretty much it for this boss. Aim the shockwaves, Make sure the people in your group are not taking your mushrooms, and if you have the ability to self-heal through, taking 1 to 2 to 3 mushrooms, go ahead and do that. That really depends on key level and whether or not it's fortified or tyrannical. So you have a couple options here. What I like to do is bring in this Defiler along with this Horror and just make sure we keep kicks on each one of these, making sure that none of their casts go off. You do need to look out for the totem that goes out so that you don't get stunned, which I do right there. And other than that, this is a really easy pull, only 2 mobs, so it does slow it down just a little bit. Once this is done, we go ahead and move into the next pull, which is the skeletons and a worm. Very similar to the previous pull right after Cragmaw, where the worm and the skeletons are. You're going to want to make sure that you're interrupting the Horror. You're going to want to make sure you're stunning the rest of the group as much as possible, and keeping kicks on anything that comes out. The biggest thing that you want to look out for is not necessarily the Void Spit, though, on those worms. So if one of those gets off, it's not the worst thing in the world. But again, if you have the kicks to spare, it's always good to kick everything. Helps your healer out a ton. These Corruptors are kind of a pain in the butt for pugs. So the Corruptors will spawn these tentacles, which you can bait to a different location. That way they're not all stacked in melee. So right before he casts them, you can go ahead and move out of melee, and then he will turn into a frontal. If you get hit by the frontal, it will fear you, and generally it'll cause a very bad chain reaction where you end up getting an extra worm or something goofy. So best thing you can do is just keep an eye on which way the Corruptor is facing, make sure you're avoiding the frontal entirely, and then you don't need to worry about it. It gets really hard on the tank to do that here, because you want to make sure that you're killing this worm, making sure it's interrupted, but then also baiting the tentacles so that you're not getting slapped either. So the camera point of view doesn't really do us any favors as a tank. Do your best, make sure that you are not in a frontal, make sure you're not getting feared, and that's the best thing you can do for your group. The rest of it is group-wide accountability here. So once these are down, we'll be at 100%, we'll be on to the last boss. Alright, so for this boss in a pug, you're going to want to tell your group to stack on you as a tank. Mark yourself, that's probably the best way to go about it, and just tell them to stick with you. The reason you're doing this is that you want to make sure you're baiting these frontals. If you have even one person stacked on a different side of the boss, the frontals are going to go just about everywhere. You can choose which way to go, but you want to be consistent about it. So I choose to go counterclockwise. I have everyone stack on me. As soon as that frontal goes out, we move, we pull the boss out of the white goop, and then we continue to rinse and repeat. Whoever gets that little cleanse on them needs to make sure they're stacked in the group, but again, everyone should already be stacked on you. What you can see I'm doing is I'm turning the boss back towards the white goop just for a better bait, just to give us a little extra room. If someone does greed, or they end up on the other side of the boss, odds are that you're going to get a little bit more spread. As you can see, our Demon Hunter was in a bad spot there, and ultimately made it so that the floor was messier than it needed to be. We go ahead and recover, get everyone restacked, we rebait the frontals, and then you just continue to do this to the very end. So that's really all there is to this boss. This is not necessarily about the boss's HP, it's more about their energy. So if you're ever curious about how you're going to track how close the boss is to death, you're just going to want to look at their energy. But really, there's no danger in this boss as long as everyone is just absolutely blasting and making sure that they're stacking as appropriate.